Cloud again first thing. That low cloud restricted to eastern Scotland, northeast England on Saturday. Lots of sunshine elsewhere, but with much higher temperatures for central and eastern parts. And as those temperatures rise, that risk of thunderstorms, especially through the Midlands, Wales and southern England.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Rishi Sunak's showing his mettle over the small boats. A Cabinet Enforcement Committee will be swinging into action to ensure the illegal migration bill is implemented, and the House of Lords are being kept up late to make them do their job. We'll examine the latest on this with my illustrious panel. As Sir Winston Churchill said, I contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle. These words ring truer than ever as the chairman of a leading recruitment firm issues a stark warning to the Chancellor that high levels of taxation are deterring Britons from working. Plus, sky-high inheritance tax is stopping British expats from returning home in old age. My panel will examine the effect of taxation. Is the goose hissing too much? With the Just Stop Oil saga continuing, I will be speaking to spokesman Dr. Patrick Hart on the arrest of activist and State of the Nation contributor Phoebe Plummer, as well as discussing claims from the Prime Minister that the eco-zealots are writing the Labour Party's energy policy. and the north-south divide for centuries. Back to William the Conqueror, the dividing line between southerners and northerners has been a topic of hot debate. Yet new equations claim to have found the true metric, Greggs and pret-a-manger. In Vox Populi Vox Day, we ask the people of the north and the south, are you a Greggs or a pret-a-manger person? The results are in. Stay tuned to find out, and I'll tell you what I am too. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by an excellent panel of political commentator and author Joanne Nadler and founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Jacob. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. President Biden and Rishi Sunak have announced a new economic partnership between the UK and the United States. Under the new Atlantic Declaration, the countries will develop future technologies, strengthen supply chains and invest in each other's industries. During a press conference, President Biden praised the so-called special relationship, saying there is no important issue where our two nations are not leading together. Rishi Sunak said that the new agreement would protect economic security. 4 children, including a British national and 2 adults, have been injured in a knife attack in the French Alps. Now, it's understood that the knifeman is a Syrian national who has refugee status in Sweden. He entered France legally and wasn't previously known to security agencies. Shocking footage has emerged online of the 31-year-old carrying out the attack in a playground in the Alpine town of Annecy. Police say he was shot in the legs whilst being arrested and has since been taken to hospital. French former football player Anthony Letalic was at the scene. He described what he saw.
I saw the guy who, indeed, is coming in front of me. He's on the grass. The cops are right behind, about 5 or 10 metres behind him, and who can't catch up with him. So I move out of the way a little, and I see him going straight towards men and women, and he attacks. He attacks the old guy. He stabs him once. The cops are behind him, can't catch up with him. And I tell the cops, just shoot him, kill him. He's stabbing everybody. So he attacks once, twice, and then they start shooting. So they shoot in front of me.
Well, here's what we know about the 5 victims. 4 are children, all aged between 22 months and 3 years old. 2 of the toddlers and the adult are in a life-threatening condition. Witnesses say at least 1 of the children was in a pram at the time of the attack. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the French president have condemned the attacker as cowardly. Ukraine's military claims that flooding in the Kherson region after the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam is forcing Russian troops to retreat by up to 15 kilometres. President Volodymyr Zelensky has been visiting the area where hundreds of thousands of people have been left stranded and without drinking water. Now, there's concern that the water level at a reservoir near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is running dangerously low. On TV, online, on DAB+ radio and on TuneIn as well. This is GB News. Back now to Jacob.
The Prime Minister is getting tough on illegal migrants. He's really grasping the nettle. We've had reports today that he is setting up a COVID-style cabinet committee to ensure illegal migrants are removed and the small boat crisis ends as soon as the illegal migration bill is through Parliament. And it's right that Mr Sunak is taking firm action because controlling our borders is of fundamental importance to the British people. As you all know, we have an extraordinary and proud history of taking in refugees, going way back to the Huguenots, but the more recent times, the Kindertransport in the 1930s, people from Ukraine and Hong Kong now. But immigration continues to be one of the most important salient issues to voters. And we've seen a report in The Sun today that if the current rate of illegal and legal immigration continues, in the next 25 years, Britain's population will increase to the equivalent of 15 new cities with a total population of 82 million. This is not a sustainable rate. It needs to be brought under control. But there are some. There are those within our lawmaking institutions that don't really see the magnitude of the problem and want to drag their feet. Yes, I'm talking about members of the House of Lords, some of whom have been whinging about being detained in the chamber until 4 o'clock this morning, debating the illegal migration bill. It seems many of our unelected members are happy to claim the generous sum of £342 per day, funded by you, the taxpayer, for being kind enough to show up. But when it comes to a few hours overtime to scrutinise vital legislation, there's a whinge fest. The decision to push the proceedings through the night is indicative of the Prime Minister's determination, the government's laudable aim to make sure the legislation gets passed in a timely way and the small boat crisis can be dealt with. And you see Labour and Lib Dem peers speaking of having to stay late as disgraceful and disappointing, whilst one noble, if idle lord, said it is ironic that we are talking about detention when the government front bench is trying to detain us here. Failing to see the irony of thinking that spending a few extra hours in one of the grandest debating chambers in the world is equivalent to those risking their lives crossing the channel at the behest of criminal gangs. The Lords is there as a revising chamber. It is not a policy-making chamber. These peers who are complaining about the policy, not about the details of the law, which is their correct role. And the Prime Minister is right to be taking decisive action on this crisis, and he shows that he will not be deterred in solving it against virtue-signalling peers who will, of course, oppose it, especially if it means getting to their beds late. The Prime Minister must stand his ground and will stand his ground and is showing true purpose. And the unelected Europhile peers who have a track record of attempting to frustrate the will of the people will not be allowed to succeed. Naturally, I want to know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com. But let me turn now to my excellent panel of political commentator and author Joanne Nadler and the founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Aaron, I'm going to come to you first just because there's a slight chance you may disagree with me. But
potentially.
Just a chance. But the House of Lords is a revising chamber. It's got a job to do. And complaining when occasionally they have to stay late is pretty poor, isn't it?
It is a bit strange, and I do think your point is very valid about it being outright ludicrous to compare being in the House of Lords to being somebody who has to cross borders without documents because you're fleeing persecution or immiseration or war. But what I would say is, Jacob, last year we saw 600,000 people come to this country legally. We saw 45,000 people also come legally, but in a very different way, without documentation, through the small boats. 45,000, 600,000. And I would put it to you and your esteemed colleagues in the government that this focus on the small boats and the undocumented migrants is a diversion from the far bigger issue of 600,000 people here perfectly legally, and that this spectacle of your colleagues in the Lords is theatre. It's theatre for the electorate, particularly the Tory base, ahead of the next general election.
I mean, I don't entirely disagree with you. I think the issue is overall migration and that this is part of the problem rather than by any means the whole problem. But it's encouraging to see the Prime Minister showing such determination that when Prime Ministers show leadership and backbone and drive, they seem to do quite well with the electorate.
Well, all of that is true. But I'm intrigued in a way. You turned to Aaron first because you said that he may disagree with you, but actually I find myself rather in agreement with what Aaron's had to say, because whilst I think it's absolutely correct to address this issue of small boats, it is a very specific part of this much wider, and I wouldn't necessarily say problem, but much wider issue. And certainly in terms of the numbers, you know, we need to have a respectful but honest conversation about the overall numbers, whether we as a society can contain this, what it means for our culture, what it means for working people in this country. And in a sense, it is a little bit of a distraction and a diversion to concentrate on the small boats, much though I absolutely agree with you that securing our borders is a first principle.
And you're absolutely right. In terms of the discussion that we need to be having, are we building the houses for the people who are coming, that whether you want them or not is, in a sense, a secondary point. When they get here, they have to have somewhere to live. And today we got some incredibly low figures for house building. So we're not providing the infrastructure that is needed for the numbers who are coming.
Well, I mean, I suppose there is a slight offset there because some of the people coming may be involved with some of the buildings. So it's not always a kind of a net sum gain in that sense. But these very complicated issues, and I think people are right to be concerned at the sheer numbers involved. We're a relatively small island. We're still a very wealthy country. But there is an issue about long-term sustainability here on a number of fronts. And I think as long as we're very focused on this particular issue about the small boats, which, I do see as a separate issue, it is a bit of a distraction from this, from the complexity of the wider survey.
But important nonetheless to secure the borders as a starting point, to encourage people to come through. You would like to call them documented routes. I'd prefer to call them legal routes.
Well, they are legal routes. I mean, they are legal routes. And
they're not. The routes are illegal, but the individual may have a claim to asylum, which would then be legal. Those are different points.
What these individuals, we're not talking about the traffickers, what these individuals are doing is not illegal under any international law. It's perfectly legal to seek asylum. And it doesn't have to be the first country either. This is a common misconception. Now, people watching this can agree or disagree with that.
I think there's an issue about whether they have a genuine claim to asylum.
Of course.
And then there's also an issue about whether, once they get here, the processing is not being subjected to a very complex set of sort of legal, legal kind of interventions, which are actually, complicating their rightful claim to that asylum.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's very important to say that for everybody, it's in their best interest to have an expeditious process, which is fair, because people that do deserve to have asylum in this country shouldn't have their case undermined by people who don't. But I do think there's a political aspect to all of this, Jacob, which is this is a Conservative government. I think it's a right-wing Conservative government. I mean, you might disagree. It's clearly to the right of David Cameron. And even David Cameron was saying in 2010, I don't need to tell you this, we will have net immigration to this country of tens of thousands, and yet last year at 600,000. Yeah. So I do think that there's a fundamental mis-selling here, particularly to social conservatives, that the problem is the small boats. I mean, we all agree on this, but there's something really profound going on. And you said about the extra 15 cities. I'm open to immigration. I think having a generous asylum policy is a good thing. But clearly net immigration every year of 600,000 isn't sustainable for anyone, anywhere.
And so you begin by getting control of illegal migration, and then you control legal migration. That's the logical way.
But are the two things completely connected? I mean, this is what I mean by the complexity of this whole issue, because there is a tendency to conflate illegal migration, genuine refugees, necessary economic migration, and then, we all get stuck in this sort of fog of what we're trying to unpick here.
Well, let's get back briefly to the House of Lords, because it does seem to me that they object to the policy rather than to the process, and that the Lords is a process body, not a policy body.
No, I completely agree with your comments about the House of Lords, and in fact, it made me slightly nostalgic for the days before the 1990s, when it was fully accepted that both houses would potentially work through the night to make sure that legislation was properly scrutinised. And then we went through this whole thing of we've got to feminise the House of Commons, we've got to make it more family-friendly. Not in itself a bad thing, but it has meant that people are now surprised when they're expected to put in the legwork.
I mean, I suppose for the House of Lords, they are of a certain age. It's probably making it more grand family-friendly rather than family-friendly. But it's not unreasonable to ask them to be there for a really important bill, to make it happen within a parliamentary day, rather than spinning it out and essentially trying to filibuster.
Well, I'm a big trade union person, so I would say if you're doing overtime, you should at least get 1.5 times regular pay. But it's so generous, the House of Lords, Jacob.
Well, I'm shocked to hear you say that.
I might make an exception.
You might make an exception.
I would like to personally, I think we should probably scrap the House of Lords, but that's an argument for another day.
Well, as long as the Democratic House maintains fundamental authority, because the difficulty with changing the structure of the Lords is it would then become more powerful, and the party and you elected to government might find had more obstacles rather than fewer. And that's really dangerous, because democracy is bound up in the Commons.
I'm in complete agreement with you, Jacob. We've had far too much constitutional reform.
This is excellent.
Just one chamber, then. There you go.
Well, I wouldn't go for one chamber. You want the revising chamber. But this brings me nicely on to the much anticipated wet wipe of the week. You've had the drum roll, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the winner of this week's wet wipe of the week is, well, who else than the whinging anti-democracy lords who couldn't be bothered to do their job and complained when they got a little bit tired. Remember to send in your nominations for next week's wet wipe of the week. And, of course, I want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, taxing us to the hilt is apparently not incentivising work. Who would have thought it? My panel and I will discuss the ever-increasing burden and how we go on from here.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Chris. Hi, Jacob. The House of Lords is not fit for purpose in this day and age, and therefore should be disbanded. I wouldn't go that far. Jenny, the Lords didn't... Ah, very good point from Jenny. The Lords didn't mind sitting through the night when it came to the Ben Cooper Brexit blocking bill. I quite like the alliteration in that. Jill, it's time the unelected House of Lords should be abolished, totally out of touch with what is affecting the British public. As Colbert said, who was French finance minister, and he said it in French, but I'm going to give it to you in translation, the art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to obtain the largest possible amount of feathers with the smallest possible amount of hissing. And the geese are now honking, as far as I can tell. The boss of one of Britain's leading recruitment agencies, James Reed, has said high taxes in the UK are deterring people from working. Mr. Reed has advised that Jeremy Hunt should cut taxes to encourage more people back to the labour market following an exodus of workers. Some 132,000 people have left the labour force since the start of the pandemic, according to the Bank of England, which has blamed early retirement for putting pressure on wages and driving up inflation. Alongside this, blame has also been cast upon higher than forecasted numbers of people claiming benefits for ill health, with the bill ballooning to just under £41 billion in 2021-22. The highest tax burden in decades and exorbitant inheritance tax rates in the UK. Some will even avoid returning to their home country for this very reason. It's high time the government rewarded and incentivised its citizens with lower contributions to the public coffers. But let's examine this with my illuminating panel of political commentator and author Jan Nadler and the founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Jan, haven't we got too big a state? It's doing too much.
I mean, absolutely we have.
But you can't cut taxes without also finding some savings.
Without finding some savings, yes.
Finding some savings. We can't just cut taxes and think everything will be all right.
No, quite, and I think this is partly why the Liz Truss experiment was so short-lived. It was the city took fright because of the so-called unfunded nature of her proposals, and politically it was inept because they went straight in with cutting the top rate of tax, which may have had some, economic benefit in terms of generating more wealth, but it was a very hard sell, and it's depressing. It was a very depressing period for Conservatives to see that, because frankly it's now much more difficult to make the case for tax cutting and for a low tax economy, even though it's more vital than ever.
But haven't we as Conservatives been a bit feeble in advocating tax cuts but never being willing to say what we would cut?
Yeah.
And that we need to say, I mean, I've cut HS2 to start with. That seems to me a big saving that you could get, maybe the best part of £100 billion. But we need the list of things that we will not do and that will take the state out of people's lives.
That's quite right, and this is why Liz Truss wasn't the new Margaret Thatcher, because there wasn't that realisation that if you're going to drive growth but have a smaller state, you have to address both sides of that equation. And what we've seen, over the last 30 years is this rise in deficit financing, this rise in, or this lack of sort of monetary policy, which has created this sort of loosening and given people the impression that that there's a lot of money washing around. And yet, the reality is coming home to bite, and people are now finding that they're taxed more highly than they ever have been. The marginal rates, of course, which I think is largely what James Reed was referring to, it has that effect on the economy, that it does prevent people from taking on extra work.
And this is clearly a problem, isn't it, Aaron, that if you get £50,000 and you've got a child, you lose the child benefit. You get a very high marginal rate of tax. The same, higher up the schedule, you lose childcare tax credit. So you've got marginal rates, in some cases, over 100%. And that becomes a real disincentive to people.
Well, there's lots of very strange aspects of the tax system. I mean, one is, student loans and student debt. You have, regular taxpayers. Let's say you're a student, you're a graduate nurse. You have £50,000 worth of debt, and you're actually paying a marginal rate which is higher than, say, somebody on £90,000 because, of course, you're paying back your student loans as well. So there are lots of very strange aspects to how we disincentivise and incentivise work. Also goes back to childcare. If you look at things like maternity policies in this country, we have people complaining about the low birth rates, and yet, my goodness, compare us to somewhere like Hungary, where actually families are incentivised to have children. They can get paid.
Well, I'd love that. You get no income tax once you've had 4 children.
Well, that's one aspect.
That'd be absolutely fantastic.
But they also, this is really remarkable. I think it's important for your audience to really know how other people do things. Yeah. In Hungary, you have up to 3 years of paid care with regards to children. So the first 18 months is really more or less like a paid maternity policy. And then after that, one of the parents, I think, gets something like twice the national minimum wage. So you might have a great job and it's not what you were earning before, but you have the option there. So I think the state does a lot, and I think it does a lot poorly. And I'll give you one example. Housing benefit, Jacob. It's a landlord subsidy. And I don't understand why we don't spend that money building social housing, which is an asset owned by local governments, which generates revenues, appreciates in value. Just look at the property market. But instead, we feed landlords tens of billions a year with this stuff.
But that's really interesting, because conversation after conversation, we talk about immigration, we come back to housing. We talk of taxation, we come back to housing. That big failure is our planning system that means we haven't got enough houses. Why do landlords do so well? Because there aren't enough houses, and that's put prices
Well,
up.
oh, come on, Jacob. Landlords have been well, big corporate landlords may do, but, individual landlords have been, I think, treated extremely badly by this government, and that's closed down, a supply of reasonably priced housing for many people.
Look, the way landlords have been treated, I think, is a mistake, but the reason rents have been high is because of a shortage of housing. And they'll get higher because there's going to be even less housing.
Well, there's no incentive, though, for people to come into private, to come into as private landlords.
No, there's a big incentive to leave the market with the rules currently. But it is interesting that again and again we come back to housing as being one of the big problems that the state simply hasn't been able to tackle.
Well, it's just remarkable.
We're all in agreement.
I'm here to bash the right, Jacob. That's my job. But let me bash.
But so far, you seem to be bigging up Viktor Orban, so you're not doing a particularly good job of bashing the right.
Whenever I've ever...
I must bring on this right bashing.
Whenever I talk about that policy,
for us.
You're Orban. That's the one thing I agree with them on. But for instance, if you look at what happens in this country to house prices under New Labour from 1997 to 2007, it is extraordinary. It goes up like that. And going back to your point about people feeling wealthier or people feeling they're doing well. We've been living on the never-never for quite a while. Part of that is North Sea oil. Part of that was this presumption that the housing market would just keep on going up, up, up and up, and it's not. And of course, you could keep on refinancing.
We're not going to have any more North Sea oil now if your people get in.
We might come to that.
Well, please, yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I mean, if you're going to pump it, socialise it, we should have done that in the 80s. But I think there are major problems with regards to what the state does and how it does it. I think that means it stops doing certain things, and I think it means it starts doing other things really well. Like, I think, bringing rail, for instance, public ownership.
And this would allow us to reduce taxes. That we all seem to be coming to that point because we are at the maximum level of taxation that the economy can bear. If you look at tax percent of GDP, it never consistently stays above the current levels. There seems to be some natural stabiliser with the economy.
But you know...
Well, because the economy will start to go into decline.
Which is what's happening, which is what Reed is saying, and what people are saying about people not coming back to the country.
But there was an extraordinary quote from the managing director of Harrods recently. It was reported in the Financial Times. And he said, we're doing fine. We're doing better than before the pandemic because in a recession, the rich get richer.
No, now, have you seen who goes to shop in Harrods? Very few of them are British.
Hold on one moment. Well, that's an important question. And of course, well, how do we tax that wealth? Because they're spending that money in this country. The biggest company right now in Europe is called LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moët, Hennessy. This is the fragment of the population which is doing extraordinarily well, not just in Britain, in Europe, the United States. And I would wager that those people probably aren't being taxed enough. And I'm not saying it's the 1%, it's probably the 0.1%, but there is a lot of money there.
But taxing the 0.1% doesn't really help you because there aren't enough of them. And where tax really falls is on the middle to low higher end earners, the people between £40,000 and £120,000. They're the ones who get hit by all the highest marginal tax rates. They're the ones who are most hit by fiscal drag. They're the squeezed. They're not the middle, but they're the people who are becoming successful, who have achieved their life's ambition.
I mean, in the short term, surely the thing to do is to address the tax thresholds, because that's what's taking people into this problem of the marginal tax rates. And I know the Prime Minister has indicated that he wants to cut the income, the rate of income tax potentially by 2% before the next election. But I mean, that would only, I would have thought, just neutralise this situation.
It's much more important to attack fiscal drag because with inflation rates running at 10%, that really hits people.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
In not traditionally well-paid jobs who are going into the 40% rate, particularly if they live in London. Anyway, unfortunately, we could talk about tax forever and about hissing geese and honking geese, and don't forget that geese saved ancient Rome from the Gauls many centuries ago. But thank you to my panel. Remember, I want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, is the Prime Minister right to claim the only people that will benefit from Keir Starmer's energy policy are dictators and autocrats? I'll be speaking to Dr. Patrick Hard, a Just Stop Oil spokesman, to get his thoughts.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. And thank you, you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Tony says it would be far better and reduce bureaucracy to lower taxation and up thresholds to incentivise the workforce. At the same time, social security handouts can be reduced where appropriate and fair. And Adrian, use the current tax take as a ceiling for spending. Then as more jobs and businesses are created, use the additional tax for paying down the capital of our national debt. There was a fund set up after the First World War to pay down the national debt. I think it's got about £200 million in it compared to the national debt of somewhere over £2 trillion. Perhaps we'll pay it off one day. Before we move on to our next topic, we have a short statement to give you. In his appearance on this programme on Tuesday the 30th of May, Lee Anderson MP stated that certain products stolen from supermarkets go straight to their local Wetherspoon a lot of the time, and that local boozers are buying such products and swapping them for drinks. We would like to make it clear that Wetherspoon sources all its products from reputable, audited and established suppliers and has policies and procedures in place to ensure that its pubs do not source products from outside its established supply chain. The selling of stolen goods is not tolerated in any Wetherspoon pub. We are happy to make this clear and apologise to JD Wetherspoon for the comments made by Mr Anderson. Now, time for this. Phoebe Plummer, the Just Stop Oil protester, who you may remember came on this programme a few weeks ago and also threw soup over Van Gogh sunflowers, has been arrested for breaking her bail conditions, which prohibited protesting on any roads. Ms Plummer was dramatically arrested after taking part in a slow march yesterday morning. Officers politely told the activist she would have to leave her coffee and could not wait for her hash browns. Most unfortunate. Ms Plummer told friends filming that her arrest was completely draconian overreach of power. On the subject of Just Stop Oil, in the past decade, the Labour Party has received roughly £1.5 million from Dale Vince, who also funds, lo and behold, the Just Stop Oil campaign group. The Shadow Cabinet Minister has contended that he's a perfectly legitimate person to take money from. If he wishes to give money to other causes, that's up to him. But it can hardly be said that he affects our views as a Labour Party on Just Stop Oil. Sounds most improbable. Never mind. However, the Prime Minister has accused the opposition of leading us into an energy surrender, claiming Starmer is putting ideology before energy security with plans to block new oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. But I'm very pleased to be joined now by Just Stop Oil spokesman Dr. Patrick Hart. Dr. Hart, Phoebe very kindly came on this programme a few weeks ago. What is her situation at the moment? She's been arrested for breaking bail conditions, but I assume she's not locked up.
Hi, Jacob. Yeah, I believe she's been released without charge, from what I've heard.
Well, will you wish her well from me? And so I hope she comes back on this programme sometime. She was a great and feisty contributor. But
well, that's very kind of you.
Don't you think that you ought to stick to the law and allow people to get on with their daily business? That I can see you protesting from the Houses of Parliament, and there are never very many of you. If it were a process of thousands disrupting the traffic's one thing, but when it's about a dozen, don't you think it's disproportionate and rather selfish?
OK, there's a couple of issues with this. So you say there's never very many of us. Throughout history, there have been protest movements. There's always a minority of people who do it. That's just the way it goes. So it really is nothing unusual. And I mean, you said to me, don't I think I should stick to the law? Clearly not. I'm here from Just Stop Oil. As you said in the introduction, I'm a doctor. I've been an absolutely law-abiding citizen my entire life. I've never been in trouble. I've not even had a parking ticket until this stage of my life. And I've thought long and hard about what I'm doing. And I would ask you and your viewers, why would I choose to break the law in this way? What is it that I've acknowledged about the climate crisis that makes me choose to break the law?
Well, I'd put it to you another way. Why don't you stand for election? Because if your arguments are so strong, you will be able to win elections by putting them to the British people.
Well, it's lovely of you to think that I can work as a doctor and an activist and then also run as an MP as well. I've only got so many hours in the day. But I think there's a fundamental flaw with what you're saying there. You're assuming a level playing field. And the problem we've seen is actually we know for decades the fossil fuel industry and politicians who have been funded by them have systematically lied to us. And we haven't had a platform for the truth, which is that we're in a climate crisis, that people are dying now and will die ever more in the future. And the only way to bring this to attention is to take the kind of action we've seen that Just Stop Oil have been taking, disruptive action. And there are actually politicians out there who can't do what they want to do because they're up against this barrage of lies and misinformation, which has been funded by millions and millions of pounds of fossil fuel money. So actually, this activism is essential if we're to create that change, if we're going to allow politicians to do their job.
But a lot of money's been going to the Labour Party from a funder of Just Stop Oil. They've got £1.5 million. The Green Party is well funded, is active, stands in every parliamentary constituency in the kingdom and only wins one seat. I'm just surprised that you have such a distaste for democracy, that you think you can't win the argument at the ballot box, so you have to take direct action. And you talk about small protesters. The Iraq war protests had a couple of million people. The Countryside Alliance had 1 million people. That these marches have been enormous numbers, not the dozen or so that you managed to get out.
OK, so we have had enormous numbers out for the type of marches that you've talked about. We saw Extinction Rebellion's big one with, I think the Met Police estimate about 90,000 people marching together.
Yeah, well, that's not that much coverage. And then you're entitled to block the traffic. I think if you've got 90,000 people, that's fair enough. But it's when you've only got a dozen that you don't have the right to block traffic with very small numbers. Simply not proportionate.
So I'm not sure where you're making this up from. That's not the law as it stands. We we have a democratic right to protest, and protest by its nature, if it's effective, is disruptive. So we do have a right to cause disruption, whatever number of us. I'm not sure why you feel you're entitled to come up with a cut-off of how many people there ought to be.
Well, because it's a question of proportionality to the inconvenience you cause to the vast bulk of the nation, that 90,000 people deserve to have a proper route for their march and so on and so forth, and traffic has to be redirected, and everybody accepts that. But just a few people carrying a banner, it's not surprising when you're blocking people getting to hospital, when you don't stand for election, that people think this is unreasonable, disproportionate and not democratic.
Right, so I've had enough of this. We're not blocking ambulances. That's absolute nonsense. Every time I hear one of these stories, it turns out to be false, and I'm not going to put up with that anymore. Secondly, yes, there are lots of people standing for an election for green issues. They need the public discourse that will allow them to get their points across and allow people to realise this is a serious issue that needs their votes. And actually, we saw massive gains for the Greens at the last local elections, massive gains. So actually, this message is getting through, and it's thanks to disruptive protest that it's getting through. I'm going to say
Well, I hope you'll
now,
stick to standing in elections rather than disrupting people's daily lives. Thank you for coming on to have the discourse with us, which I'm very and genuinely grateful for. Coming up, is Elon Musk able to read your mind? And should his company Neuralink be regulated? And Ofgem welcomes an oxymoronic new net zero mandate, which supposedly links it to the interests of consumers. With a never-ending UK north-south divide, a Greggs and Pret-a-Manger index reveals the true regional divides based on AI. The question on everyone's lips, would you rather frequent England or France, that is Greggs or Pret-a-Manger? And finally, we're in for a clement June weekend, with a heat health alert being issued in parts of England just because temperatures may reach 86 degrees. All that to come up on State of the Nation. But remember, we want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Gordon says, what these Just Stop Oil people don't seem to realise is that oil isn't just used for fuel. Plastics, man-made fibres, dyestuffs and medicines, to name but a few, are made from chemicals that come from oil. Do they want to take us back to the Stone Age? To which I think the answer is yes. Kay, I do believe in climate change, but not that there's a crisis, because the basic infrastructure isn't ready. We need to frack and have more nuclear power. Okay, I entirely agree with you. We need fracking and more nuclear power. And Paul, thank you so much. This has amused us in the studio. Just to let you know, my cat is named after you. The cat is called Jacob Rees, as in Jacob Rees-Moggy. Keep speaking up for the sane people of the UK. Well, thank you for the male Moggs. We've now got a variety of stories to discuss, starting with a tasty new development that claims the hotly debated north-south divide can be determined by people's preference for Greggs or pret-a-manger. However, despite being geographically the southernmost point of England, the algorithm categorised Cornwall as northern based on consumption habits. Greggs is a staple of the north, but personally, I prefer it because it does the most excellent cream buns, and there's a very nice one in the Keynsham High Street, if you can get there with the terrible traffic that we've talked about before. Although my wife prefers pret-a-manger because it does a good deal on coffee. But we've spoken to the good people of the north of England, and here's what they had to say.
You have to be Greggs, just by default.
Definitely Greggs, 100%. I think Pret's way too expensive.
They're a massive clothes brand now, aren't they? So, yeah, I do love some Greggs clothes, you know.
I prefer Greggs because Pret's too posh for me.
Pret-a-manger, well, I've never heard of one, but I've heard of Greggs.
Greggs. Greggs as well.
It would have to be Greggs simply because of the steak bakes and the sausage rolls.
Greggs. I've never had the other one though. Greggs.
I'd pick Greggs because I haven't really heard of the other one, so I'd just go for the Greggs.
And what do the southerners think? Take a look at this.
Pret, yeah, marginally. I'm from Huddersfield, but I've lived in the south for a while, so it's probably just, you know, been contaminated by the southern bug.
Probably Pret.
Are you from the south?
I am, yeah.
100% Greggs.
Where were you from?
Wembley, south of England, yeah.
I've never really tried pret-a-manger that much before, so I'm going to have to say Greggs.
And so the story that we're talking about today is basically the north prefers Greggs and the south prefers Pret.
Is that because we're posh?
Are you from the south then?
Yeah. I'm going to say that's because we're posh.
Yeah.
Probably too posh for it.
Well, Greggs gets a lot of support north and south, it seems, so maybe the bulk of the people are on my side. I will have to speak to Helen about this and her liking for pret-a-manger. Anyway, moving on, something maybe off. Energy regulator Ofgem has jumped on the net zero mandate bandwagon. They welcome a new plan to help Britain reach its climate change target, showing that for the first time their objectives will directly align with the interests of customers across the country. But does Ofgem really think this will link with the interests of consumers, which is basically to have lower prices? And we've been discovering in the last week £300 extra for your boiler, £180 for the hydrogen levy. Costs are being piled on people because of the net zero ambition, and it's hard to see how that's in the consumer's interest. Oh, and Britain is set to regulate Elon Musk's brain implant company, Neuralink. The coin-sized microchip has received the go-ahead and will begin trials on humans, aiming to help people who are paralysed, blind or suffer from mental health conditions. Some say the gadget's ability to obtain personal information, including emotions and behaviours, could be a personal security risk, with the Information Commissioner's Office saying there's a real danger of discrimination against neurodiverse people. Data collection by nanotech companies would be governed under existing data laws, but the ICO would lay out specific guidance and expectations by 2025. Oh, and finally, the nanny state is in full swing after our discussion earlier this week. There's going to be some warm weather. Temperatures may reach 86 degrees. It is, after all, June. And because of this, an amber alert has been issued in parts of people, and you're being told to wear a hat and drink water and perhaps carry a nice parasol by the UK Health Security agency who seems to be the nanny-in-chief do the perfectly obvious, and you'll all have a jolly nice weekend. But let me now discuss this with my brilliant panel. Greggs or Pret-a-Manger?
Well, I was intrigued by this article. I read it in full, and it cited the Pret-a-Manger at Watford Gap services as being the sort of the kind of bellwether decider. And in fact, I was in there last week, and I did choose Greggs. There wasn't a Pret-a-Manger, but there was something similar, like a Marks and Sparks or something like that. So based on that particular judgment, I would have to say Greggs. But normally it would be Pret-a-Manger, since I do live in London and there's a Pret-a-Manger pretty much on every street corner.
Aaron?
Really fascinating. I think it really highlights for me, actually, that I wouldn't even say it's a north-south thing. For me, within the M25, it might as well be its own country sometimes. And we see that with voting habits, et cetera, and this is kind of a piece with that. Remarkably, I mean, I always text my wife about this, a cheddar baguette at Pret in Waterloo costs £7.
Crazy expensive.
And you think, who's the market? Who can afford this?
Well, you see, it's the cream buns that get me. They do the most delicious chocolate eclairs in Greggs, and I have a very sweet tooth. I don't much mind about the sandwich. The sandwich is a sandwich, but a cream bun is absolutely delicious.
The only thing is, though, Jacob, does your Greggs confront you with what I found on the walls of the Watford Gap service station, Greggs, which was a kind of invocation to your behaviour, not to be nasty to the staff, not to engage in any phobic sort of abuses.
No.
And that, I have to say, rather put me off.
There wasn't any of that. So let's come on to Elon Musk. We're going to have a chip in our brain, and it can read our thoughts. That is a huge development, isn't it? I mean, it's going to be helpful for people who are paralysed and so on, so there are real advantages. But the thought that technology can do that is a bit worrying. It's one thing that even somebody on the right thinks needs a little bit of regulation. Aaron?
Well, you're a civil libertarian. I would have thought you'd have real misgivings about it. This is something that, generally speaking, there's not much difference. There are good people on the right with this. There are bad people on the same on the left when it comes to civil liberties. So I think you're absolutely right. If you said to somebody 30 years ago, we'll be carrying devices around with us, we'll have them at home, and they will be able to pick up conversations and be able to generate ads on the basis of that, I think people would have said, no way, don't do that. But it happened so incrementally that we didn't really see it coming. You obviously wouldn't want something similar happening here.
I completely agree with that analysis, and that's the sort of trajectory that I was viewing it through as well, and the extent to which we have just kind of abandoned a lot of the boundaries that we used to put around our sense of privacy.
But once they put the chip in, they'll be able to tell us to wear a hat when the weather's hot. So it might be useful.
That was always the best advice I ever had as a child, wear a hat.
And did you follow it as a child?
Well, I've followed it pretty much ever since, Jacob.
It's very sensible, but do we really have to be nagged in this way?
I think it's wise. Look.
Do you?
Yeah.
No, I'll tell you why. If you're planning to go to the office, and I know you love people going to the office.
Yeah, I do.
You might think, actually, we need to buy that new fan, or we need to make sure that the air conditioning unit works. I just think these are very small things, and they're quite helpful.
Are people that stupid? Don't they think of these things for themselves?
Well, no,
they need a glass of water. We've got glasses of water in front of us because it's hot. It's not that hot in here, but sensible people do sensible things. It's going to be 86 degrees. That's not unprecedented.
That was really my point about the sort of message in Greggs. Is kind of, infantilises us all, and it's slightly insulting, and it actually makes you want to do the exact reverse of what you're being told to do.
I can't imagine that you would want to be rude to the staff in Greggs. I can't think that would be possible. Anyway, that's all from me for this week. But next, it's Professor Daniel Wootton. What exciting scandals do you have in store tonight?
Oh, goodness me. Well, what a week it has been, Jacob. So we have lots on the fallout of the Prince Harry court case, of course. Plus, you may have realised that the wonderful Anne Diamond, bit of a broadcasting treasure here in the UK, has not been on screen here on GB News for the past 6 months. Tonight, she's going to return to GB News with a major personal announcement, so that's definitely going to be one to look out for as well.
Oh, well, that'll be extremely interesting and important, and your coverage of the Duke of Sussex has been second to none, and very interesting to see where that court case goes. That's all coming up after the weather, which we know is going to be hot, because I've told you it's going to be 86 degrees and it's going to be beautiful weather in Somerset. Absolutely perfect. I'll be back on Monday at 8 o'clock. This has been State of the Nation, and you, dear viewer, have been Moggalicious all week.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the GB News forecast, brought to you by the Met Office. Dry for most of us during the next 24 hours, but changes on the way, increasingly warm and humid, hot for some by Saturday, but with the threat of showers and thunderstorms as well. Low pressure is edging a little closer to the UK. No major changes, but what happens is the winds veer. We're going to see a more southerly component to the wind direction, and that's going to bring more humid air, but also those higher temperatures and risk of showers. Initially, some showers, mostly light showers, affecting Cornwall through the nights. Cloudy skies here, and it's going to feel warmer compared with recent nights, 14 Celsius. A marked contrast with elsewhere. A cool night to come once again, and chilly for parts of Scotland, down to 0 degrees in some sheltered spots, but sunshine in western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of the UK first thing. Any low cloud around in the morning once again retreats back to the coast, and really it lingers around the coast again into the afternoon, keeping things much cooler close to the North Sea compared with elsewhere. And it is warming up, 26, 27 Celsius towards central southern England. But with this medium level cloud and some light showers affecting Cornwall through the day, pushing into Devon by Friday evening. These showers will be on and off, mostly light at first, but as we go into the weekend, well, the signs are that we're going to see some thunderstorms developing, initially from the southwest and then later across central parts. But a marked contrast with the overnight temperatures, 16, 17 Celsius towards the southwest as we start off Saturday. Still a cool feel elsewhere across the UK, and some low cloud again first thing. That low cloud restricted to eastern Scotland, northeast England on Saturday. Lots of sunshine elsewhere, but
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners